Hi everybody, welcome to Made In again this week. Really looking forward to this episode. We've got a couple of digital transformers, digital disruptors with us on the panel today. But before we get into that, introduced to my colleague Ron Keith. Thanks for joining me again, Ron. As I say, it looks like a good show today. But before we introduce our guests, what have you been seeing this week? There seems to be a few bits and pieces going on since we last spoke in the news. What's new with you? What's caught your eye?
Well, as you know, the COVID cases in the U.S. are just kind of exploding. Some of the states are looking at potential lockdowns. Not clear whether we're going to get back to where places of work and Tesla factories and things like that are shut down. But it's interesting to see the difference between us and China. China's mostly recovered. Almost no cases. Everything's back up and running. China just reported GDP last night. They grew in the second quarter 3.2%. Pretty good.
Wow.
After contracting 6.8%, in the first quarter. U.S. announced manufacturing numbers this morning. Manufacturing was up 7.2% month on month, and that's a huge jump if you think about the amount of capacity that involves. So the best numbers in 74 years.
Wow.
But even with that, Q2 on an annualized basis, U.S. manufacturing activity shrank 47%.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
I mean, those are the key figures, aren't they? It's the annualized stuff compared with last year that is the key. And the question that people keep asking me is, particularly with respect to different sectors like automotive, is when will that sector get back to 2019 levels? And if you look at automotive, people are quoting 2023, 24. If you look at other sectors in the electronic manufacturing sector, they're quoting much earlier. So there's a lot of variability there.
It's interesting. The U.S. Car sales are looking pretty good. Used car sales are booming.
Okay.
And the speculation there is maybe a lot of public transit, Uber users are like, this COVID's going to be around for a while. Maybe I need my own little transportation bubble, and instead of taking the train or buses or whatever.
Something a bit safer.
Another interesting piece of news I saw was China-based EMS company Luxshare is actually buying a primarily iPhone factory from Wistron. Wistron for a long time was one of the top three at Apple. Luxshare and Gore-Tex are now up and comers at Apple, especially because of the AirPods. But that's not a transaction you normally see as a Taiwanese EMS selling a facility to a Chinese EMS. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting against the backdrop of I'm curious what M&A activity, what kind of consolidation we're seeing. I was on a show a couple of days ago with a consultant in Europe that covers specifically the EMS industry, and he's getting M&A calls every single day. He's got a lot of inquiries from companies looking to either buy something that's maybe distressed or use this as an opportunity to change their footprint and buy something in Europe if they're maybe an Asian dominant company. So I think as we get through this crisis, seeing what happens in terms of consolidation and M&A activity, particularly at the very top tiers, it's going to be fascinating, because I think there's we talked about where stuff needs to be made and the strategy there. Some companies just don't have that footprint and they feel exposed. So, maybe some activity there. One of the ones I thought was interesting this week was a couple of the Scandinavian companies, I think Keytron and Note, announced results. Fantastic results again, quarter over quarter. So, their second quarter was a record quarter. Their first quarter this year was a record quarter on last year. So, and I guess they're the few $100 million kind of size of company. They seem to be, if they're in the right market sector, they seem to be doing surprisingly well. And they're both very digitally enabled businesses that are very focused on efficiency in very high cost environments. So I thought they were interesting and kind of counterintuitive numbers initially to see come in.
Yeah, on the manufacturing, location front, on made in where people can make stuff, there was an announcement since our last show, but it's probably a week old, that the Economic Development Bureau of Indonesia said that they've done a deal with seven manufacturing companies to start up manufacturing there. They said
Hmm.
most of them, I don't know what most is, must be four because you can't be three and a half, but four,
Yeah.
five, six of them were Chinese firms. And so the
Okay.
total investment from the firms is about 850. So,
Yeah.
110 a piece or something. But the Indonesian government has committed to giving them up to 4,000 hectares of land for free to build on.
Wow.
The first tranche, they gave them 450 hectares. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty nice incentive.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk a bit about incentives today with our guests, because we've been seeing lots of announcements from government and would-be government about what kind of incentives might be right for supporting the industry. And obviously, we've seen the impact of tariffs and those kind of things in 2019 and rolling into this year. So I'm curious what everybody thinks about that. But why don't we take this opportunity to bring a couple of panelists in? I'll let you take the lead here, and perhaps you can start by introducing Anna to our audience.
Sure. So our first guest is Anna-Katrina Shedletsky. She is the founder and CEO of a company in Silicon Valley that's just getting all of the buzz at the moment. It's a company called Instrumental. She cut her teeth as an engineer at Apple. Apparently, she thought that flying back and forth to China all the time, that maybe there was a better solution. So she's built some technology to help people with that. And you know me, Phil. I always admire people that graduate from schools that would never take me. She's a graduate of Stanford.
Hi there.
There she
Hi,
is,
Anna.
ladies and gentlemen.
Anna, why don't you give us a quick 2-minute on your own background and on Instrumental. Let's see if Ron got it all right.
Yes, he did. He did a good job. So thanks for the introduction. As Ron mentioned, I'm a mechanical engineer by training. Was at Apple for 6 years, shipped a handful of iPods, led product design for the first generation Apple Watch, grew up as an engineer in one of the most admired supply chains in the world. And founded a company called Instrumental. We enable electronics brands to continuously improve their manufacturing processes by putting the right data at the right resolution in front of the right people in real time. Decision-making resolution, the right people being the people who make decisions and can make changes. Generally, those are engineers, and doing so in real time. And now in the era of COVID, adding on there, we were always this way, but adding on there remotely, so you don't have to be there. We use AI to discover anomalies in the assembly process and provide the analytics and traceability needed to actually solve those problems. So both to discover and solve parts of like the DMAIC circle we support, whether you're in the factory or not in the factory. And so our customers are leading brands like Lenovo, Axon, Meraki, among others. We support them from MPI all the way through end of life of the product.
Very good.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Ron, introduce us to our second guest, Rajeev.
So our second guest is also from Apple, not most recently. Rajeev and I worked together after he left Apple. He is the founder and CEO of Clip Automation, Rajeev Bhalla.
Hi, Ron. Hi, Philip. Hi, Anna. Nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Hi, Rajeev. Why don't you give us your 2-minute on Clip Automation and on your own background?
Great, thank you. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Clip Automation. So we're an automation and productivity startup based in Palo Alto, focused on digital transformation in digital health and EMS. I worked with Ron at Jewel Labs. I was VP of Operations and Automation. And prior to that, I was at Apple in advanced manufacturing and ran their robotics and automation lab. So I too work, just like Anna, on things like iPads, Apple TVs, phones, and watches. Clip is focused on digital transformation beyond Industry 4.0 to what we're starting to call Industry 5.0, which is applying relevance and personalization to the reams of data that seems to be coming out. So very collaborative with what Anna is doing as well. So thank you.
Good stuff. Well, I'm fascinated to hear about Industry 5.0 because I can think of a lot of companies that are still working hard to get to Industry 3.0, but well, yeah, or even 4.0, and yeah, curious there whether that's revolution, evolution, or a whole lot of smoke and mirrors. But we'll definitely come to that. Why don't we start with just the experience that you guys have had with respect to the pandemic and what impact that's had on your business, but also on your customers, and what it's meant in terms of inbound inquiries and how it's changed maybe what people have been asking for. Anna, perhaps you can take that one to begin with.
Yeah. So Apple taught me to be paranoid. So I saw this coming in mid-January. We actually, one of our customers builds in Wuhan, so we got firsthand experience with the situation early on. And we knew that we would need to maybe make some changes to our product to make sure that we would never be gated by the fact that travel could be restricted for some period of time. What has happened in the industry, at least as we see with electronics brands, really an insatiable thirst for data. That's kind of the best way to put it. You know, the way that our customers, these brands had kind of gotten into their process for doing NPI, which again, the spring is NPI season for the consumer electronics part of the industry. And so that's development, if NPI is not a jargon you use for development. They've never done development without having engineers on the ground, because the way many of these companies, they outsource to a CM and they'll send people to these builds and do these builds. And those people, used to be me, would stand and find and fix issues on the line. And without the engineers to be there to discover and solve, it's a lot harder to discover and solve.
Yeah.
Because it's been such a key part of the bridge. And I'm sure this is something Ron has seen in his business as well. And so we've seen companies look to find ways to get more of the data that they think their engineers can use to actually do that discovery and solve process. Unfortunately, most of the data systems that exist, at least in electronics manufacturing, are really focused around monitoring, not discovery. So for example, like one that folks might be commonly aware of, like an AOI system, automated optical inspection, or a test station. Like, you've defined in advance what you're looking for. So you're only going to find things that you expect to find. And it's really difficult to do that discovery. And frankly, like, the industry relies too much on luck, which I think is a little silly. So that's something that they've been trying to do. And we've seen a lot of like hackneyed ideas from these companies about how they're gonna bridge those gaps, and they essentially take a situation that's kind of sucky to begin with and turn it into something that's like almost unbearably terrible. We have customers who are on 8-hour calls every night starting at 6 p.m. Pacific time, because that's when the factory is open and working, and they work a shift after working their full work day. So like, these are showing that there's a problem, but it's not actually really solving this problem. So that's been really interesting to see. Lots of interest in solving this problem, repurposing travel budgets towards actual transformational kind of software that maybe could solve this problem long term. And we had the best quarter we've ever had in Q2.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah. That's crazy. Ron, does those calls that start at 6 p.m., does that reflect your life?
You know, not so much, because, you know, we have a huge team in China. We're all over Asia, and so I certainly have lived that life before. Don't miss it all that much. You know, I'll sit in on some calls, but you know, with us providing, you know, teams there, kind of the burden of doing that extra work is our folks will stay late. They'll wait till our OEM clients come in the morning, and then they'll get the download and stuff. So, you know, it's a little bit different. I think like
trying to do engineering over the phone, not just like meetings, not like 8 hours of meetings, like 8 hours of being carried around on the line. Like, no, go to the left, no, zoom in. Like that kind of 8 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that, and I think you know, I think that whole side of new product introduction is really critical, and we'll come to that. Rajeev, what's been going on in the world of clip automation through this whole process?
I think we are definitely seeing a change in how the American businesses are doing business in China. We're also seeing how China's approach is changing and evolving. A lot more proactive, usually, and Ron and I are very familiar with this, where China companies are reactive to input from what's happening out of the US. And what we're seeing now is a little bit of proactive movement from companies out of China. They're taking a more aggressive and more proactive role in what's happening in the US, what's happening in the rest of Asia. We're definitely seeing, we're a startup, and we're very focused on supporting our customers here and in China. And what's actually happening is we're also seeing a tremendous M&A type activity and interest from Chinese companies and Southeast Asian companies as well. So very, very different sense coming out of China, and a realization that, you know, our new reality will be different.
Okay, and when you say M&A activity, do you mean M&A activity in the on the supply side, so M&A activity in terms of automation companies and that kind of thing, or do you mean buying manufacturing companies?
I think a lot of automation, system integration, and I think light industrial manufacturing companies with some products are very interested in expanding their footprint out of China.
Yeah.
All of the geopolitical things, Philip, that you and I have been talking about,
yeah,
with all of those things, I think these companies are realizing we cannot be a China-only enterprise.
yeah.
And Ron mentioned Vietnam with Foxconn, and then Foxconn is also expanding to India. And I think what we're now seeing is these companies are actually taking an active interest in, well, how do we expand our footprint into the United States and the Americas?
Yeah.
So, so we're talking to a lot of these companies about how we, you know, how is there an opportunity there for us to collaborate and work with them?
Okay, so let's jump in from there right into that whole idea of accelerated digital transformation. Anna, in your articles in Forbes, you've been talking about accelerated innovation and the fact that the next 5 years worth of innovation will be crammed into the next 18 months. Are you seeing that happen already? Are people getting creative with their manufacturing processes with the right degree of urgency? Because for me, there was a sense, at least a couple of months ago, where it was all about firefighting. People were dealing with the fundamental problem and just trying to fix it in any way they could. And as you say, making a bad situation into a horrible situation. But at some point, there's got to be a realization that it's very difficult because we don't have the right tools in place. And then they've got to look at how they develop the tools. Are they at that stage yet, or are they still putting out fires?
I agree with the transition of there's like the multi-stages. There's like I've described it as like a pyramid of needs. So it's like, can the factory be open? Do we have parts to build? So like February and March was like that stuff. And now it's about like, oh, we like kind of need some oversight, and like, oh, like if we had oversight, maybe we could optimize and do things better, and have the digital transformation is like up there with like optimize, like, and so what we're seeing is kind of the first piece of this, the first enabling technology adoption that I think is really important to enable digital transformation. I don't like buzzwords, so like even just saying those words is something I don't usually say. Frankly, like I think the key thing that's happening, the unlock, is the interest and adoption of cloud-based systems. And like this is an industry that, at least, you know, we've been selling into this industry for 5 years at this point. And we saw an increase of adoption. Like in the early days, it was like, I would never put like this kind of data in the cloud, on-prem only. Well, good luck with your on-prem when you can't be on-prem. So we're seeing like in that insatiable thirst for data I was talking about is really like, okay, let's put that data in the cloud. Let's make it accessible. That's the first step. So like you could think about that as like a simple analogy would be like Dropbox kind of technology of just like get the data from here to here so I can see it and I can log in. And then I think that opens up all sorts of other possibilities of technology, like what Instrumental is building, like Rajeev is building. There's all sorts of cloud-based technologies that like really the willingness to put data in the cloud had been like I wouldn't say a blocker, but I think there's just a prejudice among manufacturers that cloud is not safe. It is much safer than your on-prem systems. So like that, this is an antiquated idea that it's not safe. It's actually safer. And it's way better to be sending images of your pre-production product back and forth through an MFA link that you have to like have multi-factor to get into than like in an email that like could be sent to the wrong Brandon, like, or somebody.
Yeah, or the wrong customer or
Yeah, so I think cloud is happening. That's happening now.
Yeah.
So we're seeing not only interest in our products, but like even just talking to customers about what they're trying to solve, how they're trying to solve these problems. Even if they're building in-house, they're going to cloud-based solutions because it's the only way to solve for distance. So that's going to be the like nugget that opens the floodgate to opportunity for things like further automation, for things like data, for all that like kind of goodness and wonderfulness in the land of Industry 4.0, like is really hinging on cloud adoption and has been kind of dragged down by delay in that adoption of that technology.
Yeah, I love that term, solve for distance. I think that's really important. And what we're doing right now is a panel that we would potentially be doing in person at a trade show, and everybody's business is currently solving for distance and doing that in terms of the supply chain, in terms of the manufacturing process is essential. And some people don't have boots on the ground, so they're hiring Ron's team because he does have boots on the ground, and then others are looking to how can we have systems in place that fundamentally give us that. So I think that's really important.
We see tremendous interest in remote collaboration. What Anna was describing about people walking around with iPhones in their hand and show me this, show me that. I think the fact that people are not able to travel, the reallocation of travel budgets to systems and collaborative software, we see like companies like large companies like Apple and Amazon have very large on-site support and service budgets. So it's not just their teams, there's also their supplier and vendor teams who need, for every piece of equipment, they need their engineers and technicians on site as well. So we see a very large redistribution starting to occur in these travel budgets where they're now being repurposed towards collaboration, remote collaboration, information sharing, secure information sharing specifically that are cloud-based. It's like, hey, we don't want WeChat and we don't want our company private critical information in WeChat channels with uncontrolled distribution. We don't want it on emails. We don't want it being bounced around in other applications. We want a secure application to do this. And we need, I think there's a tremendous change occurring, and that's kind of being driven because of this post-COVID environment. So digital transformation, just because of a necessity now, and to overuse the buzzword, Anna, it's starting to happen because they're having to adopt it. There's no alternative. We can't have boots on the ground all the time.
Yeah.
And
so
even,
it's that, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
I'm in the boots in the ground business, and there are things boots can do. And if you listen to what Anna was saying earlier about, getting the right data and doing the discovery, there's no lack of data. It's just, it is so overwhelming to go sort through and go, where is the kernel inside that terabit of data that I need that is actionable and stuff. And so, people can't do that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's just not enough people with enough eyeballs, all day long. And so the ability to capture that data and know what data you're capturing, but to use AI or decision algorithms or whatever it is to go extract the valuable piece there.
Ron,
It's certainly a supplement to, not a even if you have boots on the ground, there's just so much data.
I agree with you. I think, there's nothing that's going to replace a person on the ground, right? And a real person. And the reality is that is the best case scenario. It is an expensive and difficult scenario today. AI, machine learning can assist and supplement, but part of the challenge with data and big data is that too much data is good, but you still need context. You still need somebody to interpret it and apply relevance to it. And so it's really where, where humans and machines and processes completely intersect. It's in that space where real transformation can occur. And I think that's where digital transformation is heading, and that's where we need to go.
Yeah. So Anna, when you have that remote system, what's your vision for what that should look like? When a customer comes to you and says, we can't get boots on the ground, we've got these existing products in production, we've got new products coming through, and we talked about MPI and the challenges there. What's the vision for the future there? What would they have in place that replaces Zoom for doing meetings, and does a good job for an engineer of actually being able to see exactly what's going on the line, but also to be able to put a new product on the line, which is hugely complex?
Yeah, so there's the short-term and the long-term visions, because I think the long-term vision obviates the necessity even for the short-term solution. And certainly there's like a lot of direction to go here in the field. I think in the short term, it's really about solving kind of the two main problems that you have in development and production. And those problems aren't frankly different with COVID than without COVID. They're the same problems, but they're just, the solutions that you had are brittle to COVID. So the solution that you had before doesn't work. So in MPI and development, it's really about how do we find and fix issues? Like, it's too hard to find and fix issues quickly. It's too hard to know what's going on in real time. That's why we have to be there. In production, it's too complex to identify low-hanging fruit process improvement opportunities that save real dollars and cents quickly. Like, where your yield fallout is, but is that the easiest thing? Like, is that the lowest effort thing you can do? Like, that first bar on your Pareto might take you weeks to move. But like, if you can get bar number 5, 6, and 7, it's like the same size. And like, you can solve those in a day. And so I think having the context to be able to do that is the challenge in general. And then in COVID, a lot of that was hands-on, and like, they're in the factory, at least as like an engineer, that's what it was for me. So the way to solve that problem now is to essentially get that data. The same data that you use to solve the problem slow, let's solve the problem fast with that data. So instrumental, we grab images of every unit at key states of assembly. It's too much data. So we use AI to pull out the things that you actually care about and want to see, that you would hopefully have the luck to see on the line. And then in production, what we're looking at is shifts in failure rates. So can we detect a shift in process on the line? Can we show you a Pareto of like, here are the top defects that are things that you can actually, that are causing the most regrettable rework, that are causing all of these different kind of cost vectors for you, so that we have a customer who runs production like in the middle of China, and he, Bobby, Joey, Susie, like, you're bar 1, you're bar 2, you're bar 3, and then he watches his dashboard throughout the day, like, oh, Bobby's doing a good job, like the defect rate's going down, I can watch it in real time. But the long-term vision is to not have to do that at all. Like, why are there humans in this loop? Humans are really good at solving problems, being intuitive, designing stuff. That's where our strengths are. So why do we spend human time cleaning data, looking at graphs? Like there's math to tell us when certain actions should be taken. So really the vision, I think for the industry, it is Instrumental's vision, but I think it aligns with the industry, which is lines should have the intelligence and the brain to be able to identify those opportunities and improve themselves. And to do that in machine time, not in human time. And we call that optimization. Optimization has been around in manufacturing for a long time. But this concept of, and actually I would say to Rajeev, like, I think that Industry 5.0, or I actually don't call it that, I call it autonomy, like the level 5 of autonomous driving for manufacturing is about autonomy and optimization. Like the ability for a line to identify like, oh, if I want to improve this yield, I'm going to like change the knob on this machine. Like making that correlation today is something that engineers like me do in spreadsheets. But it is a lot of work to do just one optimization problem. Like I did one at Apple that took me 2 months because pulling the data, cleaning the data, all that stuff. And like, if we could live in a world where those opportunities are constantly being discovered, even if there's still humans in the loop to say, yes, press the button, make the change so that, you know, it doesn't do anything crazy. That's the vision. Like that's the future that we all want. And I think if we were to build this future, we would save massive amounts of money and energy and capital and people time that could be deployed in other ways.
In more high value jobs. Rajeev, does that vision align with your vision of Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0, smart factory, digital transformation, whatever buzzword we want to use? You're on mute, Rajeev. I can see you speaking, but I can't.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting. You know, as an insider, you know, the use and overuse of buzzwords is always a very loaded thing. I think the challenge we have is we're generating zettabytes, and we briefly touched on this, zettabytes of data. We have so much data that there's an overwhelming amount of information. And what Anna and Instrumental are doing is what we think is the right approach, which is the applications of a relevance engine, right? So it's not all the data all the time. It's here's the, you know, relevant data at the right time to the right people. So the application of a relevance engine is key, but large component suppliers, large companies in this IoT 4.0 space, they're focused on the monetization of instrumentation and the monetization of devices. So they're focused on, you know, the sensing layers, the perception layers at the bottom, the sensors. They're focused on the synthesizing of this information, the storage of this information, and the presentation layers. But the interpretation and relevance layers are really missing in Industry 4.0, if we use the buzzword, right? Look at the roadmaps of, you know, great companies like Siemens and Rockwell. They're all focused on this because that's where the money is today. But the reality is what COVID is very clearly highlighting is it's like, hey, I don't need all the data. I've got way too much information as it is, and I don't have the people to deal with it. What I really want is I need you to tell me what's the problem, and I need maybe the 5-10 minutes before it. Right? And I need it at the incident. So for us, you know, really digital transformation and disruption, to use the thesis, in this post-COVID environment is going to be all about relevant information. Because we're not hiring more people to process more data. We don't want to do post-event analytics excessively. We want it real time. We want it so that we can make decisions faster. And it's getting more competitive. You know, companies can't be like, hey, well, I got a ton of data. Let me send it to a data farm in China or in India, have them label it for me, and then I'll figure out what to do with it. And then maybe in 3 weeks, an engineer will issue a report. You know, we can make those turns almost real time on the factory floor with you know, engaged and, you know, remote, but online collaboration engineers who are working it. I think that vision is our vision. And that's where we think the competitive edges are going to be.
Yeah, and it's certainly at the intelligence level and how that intelligence is applied to make better decisions, to make faster decisions. Anna, when I was listening to you speak, when you talked about your customers, they seem to largely be OEMs, not EMS companies. Who should be investing in this? Should it be the EMS company saying, "Hey, here's everything for you guys to see, so you can do a much better job and we can perform much better for you," or is it the OEM saying, "Hey, I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I want to have eyes on that and systems in place to monitor that"?
It's a good question. I mean, I think both, but like, what is the reality? The reality is that since COVID has happened, that EMS companies are a lot more interested in what we're doing than they were before as a value add, as a differentiation, because they recognize there's a new problem to be solved. That being said, like, instrumental from the beginning, coming from the space and like trying to create a business model that works in the space. I mean, ultimately what we've found is that the brands have the most to gain and the most to lose. And so when you have high margin and a lot to lose, that's a great place to like build a business. And so that's kind of where we were attracted to, because ultimately it's about shipping great products into the field. I think like the Amazon reviews are impactful. And so you only have to have a couple of lemons to tank a review. And that's a top line issue, top line revenue issue. So, or having like something explode in your pocket. It doesn't matter that like Foxconn might have made it and been it was a Foxconn operator that like stabbed that battery with a screwdriver. It like matters whose logo is on the product. And so we see a lot of traction there. And then frankly, like, the data is the brand's data. Usually that's how the agreements work. And so if you're going to be looking at data, ultimately the brand has to get involved anyway. You might as well just go straight to the source. And sure, we like certainly support and help, like, we view the factories as essentially an extended customer. Like, we want them to see value in what we're doing and use it, and our customers want them to see value and use it. But it's primarily driven by the brand, who really owns the data stream and frankly owns the supply chain, because it's about a lot more than one factory, right? It's about, and actually that's part of the problem. That's why Instrumental is pretty unique. We're a manufacturing data company that doesn't sell to manufacturers, because manufacturing is more than one factory. It is a supply chain of 20 or 100 factories from a variety of different suppliers who have different MES systems and different data, and like try to put all that stuff together into one system. And so it can't be owned by the Foxconns of the world, because they don't own all the factories. They own just the one. And so actually I think like
Foxconn factories,
has to happen at the brand level, because they own the supply chain.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think they certainly have they certainly have the most to gain and to lose. But if you got a company like Foxconn and they're building subcomponents for Apple and they're building the final product for Apple, I think they could get out there in front of this thing and say, look, here's a capability we have, and not necessarily for Apple, but you and I were talking last night about the fact that sometimes there's this resistance, even if there's good ROI. And I think that the EMS companies are a lot more used to, I understand what CapEx is needed in the factory, and they run a fairly capital intensive business. Whereas most of the OEMs, especially if they're outsourced, they might have a capital intensive business, but they're not buying a lot of manufacturing equipment other than some test equipment. And I would think that one of the, kind of tier 2, but really aggressive tier 2s, like a Luxshare, like a Gore-Tex, should get on this and go, we're going to have this as a standard part of our FATP, right? And so, whoever's coming in, you can show them this is part of the way we do it.
Certainly,
I think
companies like Gore-Tex are actually trying to build their own in-house solutions for some of these problems, but the problem is much more narrowly scoped. And so therefore you have much less potential impact.
You know,
Is kind of my take on it. And you're getting the factory's perspective of value and not necessarily like the industry-wide perspective of value.
You know, Ron, I think, you know, the challenge is at the end of the day, Foxconn or companies, tier 1, tier 2, OEMs and CMs have a lot less to lose. You know, if you are the brand, if you're Apple or you're Amazon and there is an event or an issue, it's your brand that gets hit. It's your bottom line. Foxconn is affected. They do lose, but they don't lose, right? The way these agreements tend to work is they're not actually, and you're well aware of them since you structure these, is there is a volume element to them, but they make their money off MVA, right? Which is manufacturing value add. So which is like, well, you know, I want you to sell a lot of it so I make a lot of money, but I get paid after I ship the product. And I don't get paid on the profitability of the product. And I also don't get paid on how much automation or industrialization I've applied to the manufacturing process. I charge you for what it cost me. So it's a cost plus CM model. And so, you know, getting them to become a driver is harder. And which is why, you know, Instrumental and Clip are always having to go past the CM and the ODM directly to the customer, because they're the ones who have a vested interest in amplifying NPI activity, in monitoring quality events. And the CM is going to be like, yeah, I'm interested and I really do care, but I'm not interested in letting you know what's happening and letting you inside the kimono. They want to obfuscate this as much as they can. So that's why the driver has to come from somewhere else. It could be an SI, could be a CM, but it's primarily the key beneficiary.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why, you know, CMs like Foxconn, you know, operate on 3.5% gross margin and, you know, less than a point after tax, because they think that way. You know, there's a pretty good dispersion of the levels of operating profit, right? If you look at Jabil, you know, Jabil earns, you know, 2.5 times on a percentage basis the operating profit that Foxconn does. But they're also, you know, we had Mondello on the show a couple of weeks ago. They're also very willing to think outside of the box. And in my mind, one of the only OEMs that'll think outside of the box, they'll get ahead of a technology curve. They'll invest as a form of differentiation. They will create a capability, whether it's a data capability, whether it's a unique process capability, and they'll create that capability, and then they will go parlay that into a better margin than, you know, the guys like Pegatron, right? I mean, Pegatron's always going to be the cheapest guy on the planet. They're never going to be the most visionary guy on the planet.
Yep.
And so
they never invest in R&D, right? They're interested, but not at the cost of margin. Yeah.
Right, but there's a belief that it's an investment without a return, and I reject that. I think that getting in front of that, you can actually get a good return on that investment, differentiate yourselves from some of the lower end players, but
yeah,
you know, it's interesting.
Apparently Anna's Q2 is good enough. So.
Yeah, but Ron, it's why the Lux shares of the world are actually getting ahead, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at,
I agree. I absolutely agree with that.
Right, because they are taking that approach and they're starting to basically nibble away at the Foxconns and the Pegatrons of the world, because they are investing in R&D. They are focused on NPI. They are focused on additional value add. They don't want to just build it for you on an MVA margin. They want to do the automation. They want to do the support. They want to do the engineering activity. And that's an attractive proposition. And in today's day and age, it's even more attractive, right? The one-stop shop with the kind of magnitude to be a Foxconn, but with the engineering powerhouse that goes with it. So I think that's a very attractive proposition.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think if we look at the evolution of the EMS industry, the desire to be the biggest was huge. Certainly at the beginning of the noughties, the desire to be the cheapest has been huge. Gradually, there's been a desire to be the smartest. I'm not sure I think they've talked the talk a lot. I'm not sure they've walked the walk as much as they should. I absolutely fundamentally believe that the EMS industry and EMS companies individually would be better if they adopted both of your technologies, you know, more oversight using those kind of technologies, but more automation in the factory. So is it them? Are they slow to adopt these new technologies because they're on wafer thin margins, or is it you guys not being able to explain the ROI to them, the right KPIs, the routes to do that? Because I think for some EMS companies, the whole industry 4.0 thing seems overwhelming, and now Rajeev is telling us we've got to go for 5.0, and that's going to freak us. That's going to freak us out even more because we're at 3.3 or something. What's the problem?
So I remember when I started Instrumental 5 years ago at this point, originally we started as a robotics company. We don't build robots, but that was how we started. And so I remember doing a trip in China where I connected with a bunch of people and went and saw their factories, like, what kind of robotics are you doing? And I was really struck. I remember being brought into this room where they were building dongles of some kind. And he's like, yeah, look at this process. Like, this machine that's super big replaces 12 operators. And we just have one at the front pushing in parts and one at the back, pulling out parts. So we save a lot of money. And I was like, that sounds great. And he's like, no, it sucks because our customer comes in and they see this and they're like, okay, I'm going to pay for that guy and that guy. 2 people.
Yeah.
And so instead of them being able to charge for 14 people worth of headcount, and then 12 of those, which is automated, they're only able to get their customer to pay for the 2. And so it makes it really difficult for the ROI to tape out. It's still possible, but it makes it really difficult. And as an analogy to other types of technologies, the benefits, customers kind of expect that those benefits get passed on to them. The customers of the EMS kind of expect to get passed on, which is frankly pretty unfair in the industry to the EMS industry, that their customers have those expectations, or they're trying to pass on the savings so they can be cheaper. And so I think it's kind of a little bit funky, the incentives. And so it's another reason to get the brands on board. So, all those EMSs can be thanking us later that we got all the brands to figure out that they actually should pay for some of this stuff. Because ultimately there is benefit on both sides, and there's a reason why both sides could pay. But it's we decided to align on one side, but there could certainly be technologies to align on the other. It's just you have to be able to still convince the brand to pay for it.
It comes.
And Rajeev, you're on the other side, aren't you? Your customer kind of has to be the EMS, and is fundamentally the cost plus model a barrier? Because if you reduce their costs and they're charging cost plus, they're just charging less, and that doesn't help them.
I think it prohibits radical innovation, right? Or true transformation. It prohibits the ability to take experimental steps. It slows down the rate of innovation, which is why, anybody who's been to these factories sees, the latest technology from the 90s on the manufacturing floor, right? So we tend to see older systems. We don't see cutting edge automation unless the customers drive it. But a large part of this, and this is in defense of ODMs perhaps, is the fact that the cost model Anna described of, the customers wanting to pay for some things, but not all of it, right? They don't want to pay for extended quality. If they're saying, hey, I'll put 6 people at the back of the line and I'll make sure every product is perfect. It's like, well, why do we need 6? Why can't I'm going to pay for 2 or maybe 4. And maybe I do, or maybe I don't want to put in an expensive vision system to do the inspection. So I think what ends up happening is part of it is their motivation and their ability to fund these activities. The other part is the cost pressure. Ron, you said it in one of the previous shows where it's like, hey, I have this supplier and I don't like him. I want you to give me a better product at a lower price. You know, so
Yeah.
all customers come in and say, hey, I want price reduction, right? It's a systemic GSM activity where they're constantly driving down price. And what you start doing is line item pulling out all the pluses and bells and extras until you get to the bare minimum. And I think that model makes it very difficult.
Yeah, Ron
So then
talks
what's
about
gonna-
free perfect now as his as what everybody wants. Go
So
ahead,
then,
Ron.
given the size of the EMS industry, and given that more than half of the world's electronics manufacturing is done by someone other than the brand owner. Someone, we call them OEMs, but the OEMs don't have an EM anymore. What is going to be an industry-wide catalyst to really get us to Industry 4.0? And we've been talking about Industry 4.0 for 7 or 8 years.
Yep.
And I haven't been in any factories in the last couple of months, but I just haven't seen all that much progress towards it. I'm seeing a little bit more with some sensors and stuff, but it's just so far from kind of the vision that is there.
Yeah.
Is it stymied by just kind of the way our manufacturing supply chains are set up today?
Ron, I would suggest it's going to be very industry specific. EMS, consumer electronics, by its very nature, is a minimalist, low-cost manufacturing activity, right? We're always chasing the lowest cost. If we can't get it in China, let's go look at Vietnam. If we can't find it there, let's go somewhere else. So EMS is going to continue, consumer electronics will continue to do that. And it's what the industry prides itself on. Short ROI cycles that are tied to one-year product cycles, right? Very compressed and very high pressure product development cycles leave very little room for equipment cycles. So you don't see capital requests in automation. Now, if you look in other industries, in digital health, in automotive, the level of investment in digital transformation is much higher. In the oil and natural gas, where there's tremendous instrumentation, right? Yeah. There is a much bigger push happening in these industries. So I think it's going to be industry and context specific. EMS is going to continue to be a follower, continuously. Yeah,
I think I look at the different roles of the different people that are in there. The OEMs and the EMS companies, and it's that combination of pressure from the different parties to try and get things done. I think there are some fundamental challenges with the way the two interact. I just wanted to switch gear in terms of trying to get to that place that we want to be in terms of Industry 4.0 and digital transformation. And we've seen lots recently in the press about incentives for manufacturing, to bring manufacturing back. My view on bringing manufacturing to high cost environments is quite straightforward. People don't want to pay more for their products. They might like the idea of a made in America, or here everybody's talking about made in Australia. But they don't want to pay more for it. So if they're not going to pay more for it, it's got to be made more efficiently. It's got to be digitally transformed. But the government incentives and the ideas that I'm hearing from the government don't seem to reflect that. They don't reflect an investment in digital transformation. Do they need to? Do they not understand it? Or is it just up to the OEMs and the EMS guys to sort it out themselves? Anna, you look perplexed there.
Well,
what's your thought? If you were president, which eventually you will be.
The tariffs are not the right direction. They did weird things to supply chains that are bad. They made them longer because people found the loopholes. And longer supply chains are particularly bad when various countries are going up and down in whether they're open or not open, et cetera. Yeah. So it was a perfect storm combination that was particularly bad.
Yeah, there were no winners there. Yeah. No winners.
Someone got some tax money, so maybe there were some winners there, whoever got to put that in their pocket. But it was bad. So that's not the way to do it. In general, I guess, I'm, born and raised in the US, like I'm a big fan of America, but like at the same time, I'm also a big fan of efficiency and like specialization. And so I'm not like a huge made in America like proponent. Like I'm fine with it. I'm happy to support it. I'm happy to support what anybody's doing anywhere. And so I guess I don't like have a really strong opinion on this other than, yeah, like if your mission is to bring more manufacturing back to the US, then it's got to be way cheaper than it currently is. And I think like you can look at industries like the defense industry, which is made in America because by law it must be. And so ITAR products and products like that is a large portion of American manufacturing. And frankly, it's like even further behind. We're talking about EMS and how far behind it is in terms of its adoption. It's even further because there's even more restrictions on anything you can do with data or cloud or anything. And so there's like a great need there. And so I think maybe like the place to start is to like, we've already got some here. Why don't we make that stuff better? And use that as the proving ground for the easier case, which is the higher volume case. Like if you can make the ROI work on devices that are running 20,000 a year, then that ROI is going to work on devices where you're building millions a day or a million a day. So anyway, that's one. Anna, Rajeev, you've built stuff in America, so tell me.
Anna, you and I disagree very strongly on this. I am a big proponent of Made in America, and I would like to see manufacturing come back. There are over 11 million factories in China. There's only 150 factories in the United States. In the last, I'd say 25 years, we've seen this slow erosion of our manufacturing base. And I remember helping move equipment from factories in Milpitas to Wuxi, China, and then to other countries. I think for the US to maintain its competitive edge, not just in knowledge and technology, but we have to bring it back into manufacturing. You know, the other part of this, but it can't just be, here's a bunch of money and good luck, because, you know, you kind of used, you know, anytime you move a factory, you have maybe a new product, you have a new process, you have a new CM or a new manufacturer, a new site, and you have I'm going to use the perfect storm. You have a perfect storm of everything is different. And so saying, hey, I'm going to move a factory at a new manufacturer, new site, and do all of these changes, and we're going to be better, is not how you win, right? At most companies and most transitions like this can absorb one or two. So you can do an existing mature product at a new factory at a new CM. But if you try to do everything, you're going to fail. Srini Sundararajan, who's our CTO at Clip, wrote this great paper on rebuilding it. So if somebody hasn't read it, please check out his LinkedIn site where he's got it posted. But it talks about, hey, here's the steps we need to take if we're going to do true bringing manufacturing back. You know, it can't just be an all-in, throw money at it problem. It has to be structured, and we have to be more competitive too. So we're still going to follow the dollar.
How do we structure it then?
I think it has to be, we have to start with mature products, right? We have to start with known mature products. We have to, if we're going to do new factories and new sites, we can't be saying, okay, and it's a new product, and it's a new CM, and it's a new system integrator, and it's a new process. So we're going to, just like it took China a while to come back online, right? You know, when VW moved manufacturing to China, they didn't say, and it's a brand new car. They took existing factories and they moved them from Germany to China. And then we saw that building and rebuilding effort in China, and we have to apply that here.
How do we make it cost competitive though? Because it's just like it's
and we can't
right?
And we can't build China in the US. I think that's important.
We cannot build China in the US, so it has to be more targeted, right? If you're doing 2-cent injection moldings for complex manufacturing, that's a whole different level of equation. Yet what we're also finding is Germany and Japan are managing to maintain a competitive manufacturing edge. Yeah, of course they're going outside and they're investing in it as well. Yet they're able to retain key and critical industries. And I think that's how we have to approach it.
I think it's just really hard if you think about something like cell phone manufacturing, like kind of the epitome, top of the pyramid for EMS, just because it's complex and small and high volume, very high volume. It's such a human effort to put those together. It's like 300 people sitting shoulder to shoulder. You can't do that kind of thing when the cost of labor is what it would need to be. And so you kind of have to wait for there to be automation that could actually put together some of those parts, or where you could do it with less. But like, those products aren't really designed, as you know, the PD engineers like me don't really design those products for automation. You got to like thread that screw through a flex and like get it in at some crazy angle. Like that's not, the reason I'm skeptical is I just don't see how that gets translated. I totally agree that like routers, like PCBs in a box, like that stuff can be automated. We can make mice in automated equipment. We can make keyboards in automated equipment.
Anna,
that makes sense.
I think, you know, I think we're talking about a new production system. It is a true, and it will be disruptive. And if, to Philip's point earlier, if we're going to sit here and try to emulate low-cost, mass market manufacturing the way China does in the United States, we're not going to succeed, right?
Why the hell would we want to? We don't have enough labor to do that today. You know, Flex did that big experiment in Austin, and it was just a complete bust. They just could not get enough. Not only could they not get enough people with the discipline to be on the line, you couldn't get enough engineers. You know, I wrote a paper or an article for Industry Week. Seems like 100 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and talking about the lack of industrial engineering training in this country. So here's a couple of you know, actual data points. There are more people that graduate the University of California system each year with a degree in communications than there are industrial engineering students in every college in America. Right? Go think about that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
China graduates more people with degrees in industrial engineering every year than we graduate every single class of engineer. Right? Yeah. I don't want to bring cell phone manufacturing back here. It's going to make a cell phone more expensive. It's going to make it less scalable. It's going to lengthen the product cycles. I agree. Look, we cannot be a country devoid of manufacturing, but we need to think about, you know, what does it make sense for us to manufacture? Yeah. You know, 70 years ago, when you know, right after the war, when the garment industry really started getting hollowed out. Oh, you know, it's so immoral, and you know, all of these people in North Carolina aren't hand knitting socks anymore. You know, and we got past that, and our GDP per capita, which is the single best measure of, you know, the wealth of a nation, you know, continues to go up, and continues to go up at a rate, you know, more than most. So, you know, I'm more like Anna. I want to build stuff where it makes sense to build stuff, because one of the things people lose on this equation is, you know, I'm sure, you know, this 5G phone is going to be $1,000. And if it was built in the United States, it'd be $3,000, right? So everybody benefits when the products are cheaper, right? So, but that's I think that's for a different session maybe. We kind of got a little bit off to the 4.0.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe that's because you've got a non-American asking the question. So, and my view is the same. You know, stuff needs to be made where it needs to be made, but we need to consider sustainability in there. We need to consider, you know, what's right for the product, and you know, where the value is, where that value chain is from the new product introduction all the way through. We're pretty much through our hour, so I want to just do a quick wrap up here with kind of key takeaways that everybody thinks they've maybe got from the conversation, and hopefully there've been a few. For me, I'm a little bit scared about Industry 5.0, and partly because I haven't seen 4.0 yet. But I think
Industry 5.0. Industry 5.0 is what we're going to use to make 6G cell phones, right?
That'll be it. That'll be perfect.
So I think it's already happening. That's the interesting part. If when we talk, it's interesting you're saying that, because when you look at what Clip Automation is doing and you look at what Anna is doing, we're already looking at the applications beyond the data, right?
Yeah.
And that level
Absolutely.
of digital disruption is, for lack of a better word, is Industry 5.0, right? So, and so I think it's actually happening, and it's giving companies a newer and better competitive edge. So,
and if it's those autonomous factories that Anna mentioned, I think that's a hugely exciting opportunity, and it's something that all the constituents in that equation need, whether it's the EMS or the OEM or even the consumer who gets a possibly cheaper, possibly product faster to the market, and one that's more effectively built. Anna, what about you? What about takeaways from today? What would you say to our audience as a wrap up?
I don't know. I think we didn't get to talk about the incentive structures. So I think it's important always when thinking about new technologies to think about who in the organizations are incentivized and how. And that goes for both selling those technologies, but also if you're buying those technology, who in your organization is incentivized and how, and are they incentivized in the right way? And I'm happy to talk about that more if anybody's interested in having an offline conversation about those incentives.
Yeah, I think the way we reward people and the way we create those incentives for businesses is absolutely fundamental, and I think it's huge for both of your technologies in terms of the adoption. Ron, what about you? Final thoughts?
We unpacked an awful lot of stuff. I mean, this could have been 3 hours on 3 different topics, but I think one of the things I take away from this is there's a thoughtful footprint. There's a thoughtful blueprint for this Industry 4.0, and yet we made 10%, 20% progress on it in 7 or 8 years. I think the United States, I think all the other manufacturing countries, we need to really think about how we move that forward, because there's so much benefit to society of cheaper, more durable, more reliable products. And also, despite our conversation about manufacturing, there's this kind of hierarchy of skills, this hierarchy of pay, and it's okay to move beyond manufacturing as being, well, those are the highest paid jobs. And so being able to do some of the things, Anna was talking about taking the data and have it self-correct the machines. That could be really interesting for U.S. manufacturing. If we're going to talk about bringing stuff back to the U.S., we need to talk about it from the ground level. How do we do that? What are the obstacles to that? But overall,
I was just going to say some of the optimization opportunities by having that better data is the equivalent of 60 headcount in China. So like if you're looking at on a product that only has 30 headcount. So like it is technologies like this that solve some of the cost differentials, to your point. Like we presented a proposal yesterday, we're saving 68 headcount on a product with 30. Even though it's not about headcount, it's like headcount equivalency as a metric.
And create that efficiency. So Rajeev, last word from you. Is it just foot to the floor and accelerate towards 5.0? Is that what the industry needs to do?
Leapfrog that 4.0. Go right past it.
Skip that one.
I think it's amplify true transformation, and then do it through specific industries. Right. I'm a big fan of reshoring to the United States and regionalization. And for that to be successful, there are industries that are not as cost sensitive, right? Digital health, medical devices, pharma, where you need that level of regulation, data, and informatics to be successful. I think we have to target and channel our attentions there. And then all of these technologies immediately become enablers and amplifiers for us. So, and that's what Clip is doing. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. I'm talking to lots of CEOs of EMS companies at the moment, and they are all looking to some kind of level of reinvention and, trying to figure out what they are moving forward, and whether that's actually in the factory or whether it's in the way they present themselves. a lot of that comes down to digital transformation. I'm going to introduce those people to both Rajeev and Anna and make sure they get talking to them and make sure they get some smart ideas moving forward. I'd encourage anybody watching to reach out to Anna and Rajeev on LinkedIn or to Ron and I if they want some more information. But in the meantime, let's wrap up here. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you to everybody that's been on been viewing on Made In, and we'll see you all in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you. Stay safe.